started, and let's join us. All of you have joined, so let's explore some key topics and just foster the collaboration among each of us and have a healthy discussion regarding each and every topic. So we're excited to welcome our first speaker, Smita Ashok. She's a senior technical writer at Zora with over 10 years of experience in the field. Known for her enthusiasm and dedication, she has a keen eye for a detail and also a knack for, for asking the right question. With the belief that understanding complex topic is the key to effective communication, she strives to make intricate concepts accessible to all audiences. She's worked with a diverse range of companies, from startups to international corporations. She brings a wealth of knowledge and innovative ideas to the table. So please join me in welcoming her as she shares her insights with us today. So yeah, hi Smita.
Thank you, Anshita. Thank you for the lovely introduction.
Yeah,
Thank you, TWT, first of all, for giving us this platform and the opportunity. As Anshita just introduced, I am a senior technical writer with Zora, and I'm based out of Chennai currently. And over the span of my career, I have worked with multiple organizations, say from a seed stage startup to an enterprise company, and one pressing problem, or one pressing gap that really needs addressal is bridging documentation to the rest of the pipeline. So I think it's a good point to start with the release. So I'll just start with sharing my screen. Is my screen visible to everyone?
yes.
Yeah. So today I'll be covering about the introduction of docs release management. I've put an asterisk because sometimes, often it's felt that, that is one missing piece that really needs its place in this entire life cycle. So broadly, the topics that I'll be covering today are release management 101, which is just a little bit of brushing up the basics, and then the key stakeholders that are a part of this release process, and how do we plan a release. I'll talk about release versioning, and then streamlining this process end to end, and then how, as a documentation team, the leaders and all of us can uh, get a consolidated view of what is happening in our team, and some tools that I'll be touching upon, and all of this with the perspective of the docs team. So let's get started. um, one simple question: what is release? And the other question is, what is release management? So when I say release, a textbook definition would be, the development of one or more component changes and then deploying it to a product environment. Let's say, for example, the iOS 18, which happened very recently and is just buzzing around. So this is a release. But then, to put this release together, a lot of teams would have relentlessly worked together, streamlined, come up with the process, and then brought this to our tables. And that is where release management comes in. This backend process of planning, scheduling, and testing of, say iOS 18 upgrade in this case, through various phases and environments. And that in itself is a very big cycle from start to end. So let's first look at the teams involved, or the stakeholders that participate in every successful release, or every release for that matter. So some segments of the release are what's being built, and when it is being shipped, and how it is being brought to the market, right? So you see two groups of people here. One is working towards planning what needs to be built and what needs to be shipped, and the other one is working on how you want to launch the whole thing. So let's put some names to these actions, and the stakeholders would be product management. And for when it is shipped, it will largely be developers, but then project managers also come into play here. And what is being brought to market is predominantly handled by the marketing team, because they start with the customer communications. So broadly, this whole process can be segmented as builders, shippers, and storytellers. But one gap that is screaming at me And also at the images that you see would be the communicators. As in, I have built something, I'm going to go to the market and I'm going to spin around a lot of content on usability and advantages and everything, but then there's a right way to communicate, right, at a product level, what has gone out and what has changed or what has been fixed. And I think that gap is bridged by the documentation team, which is often left out in this entire process. So we'll today be talking about how we can position ourselves in this life cycle. For that, let's first see how an ideal release cycle looks like, right? So let's take the example of iOS 18 here. Now, the team has come up with an idea like, okay, fine, it's time to upgrade to a newer version. So, it's either a customer request or somebody has in the business has decided that, hey, to keep up in the market, we need to upgrade, right? So that is the idea of the change that has come in. And the first step would be, now they will plan a release around this. So the entire scoping of this happens as a new release, and certain steps that are followed is planning. So they plan capacity, they plan budgets, they plan the teams, they plan the stakeholders, and they'll plan how they're going to uh, build this process end to end, and they plan the dates. Post planning, it is approval and assessment, where you talk about the budgets and bandwidth and team capacities and other priorities. Once that is approved, you have the development, um, and then you test the feature and then deploy it to the market. And post deployment or post production, you give support to onboard or to help customers acquaint and adopt with the new feature. And that is when one whole release cycle ends. Now, if I look at each of these boxes, I can put a team's name that works as a core in this, in each of these steps. Say planning would be the CXOs and the product management. Approval would be again the CXOs and finance and other leads. Development would be engineering and product management. Testing is QA. But now, when I look at each of these, there is no place where I see, a documentation team coming in. But can a release ever go out without a release note or some kind of a knowledge article, or an entire product documentation? Obviously no. So where do we position ourselves in this cycle? Ideally, the planning phase is where the documentation team must onboard itself. Why? Everybody is planning capacity. Planning phase, as we thought, the engineers are planning capacity. We are planning budgets, we are planning the maybe we are including the UI teams just to see how we can do it. So I think this is the right time when the docs team also must get onboarded to get a high level view of the plan as to what is being done here and what is the roadmap and when the release is happening or when the release is expected to go out. So planning phase is where the docs team onboards, and until the deployment phase is where the documentation team must place itself ideally. So through this process, where you have about like 6 steps which spans over a couple of months in some cases, uh, these are some of the activities that the doc team must do to support a release in a product or software. So you have to plan, you have to start with your requirements and then start drafting the actual work, and then you review and you are ready for publish. So by the time the actual code or the product is tested and is ready for deployment, your docs should also be ready. But is that the ideal scenario? So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to bridge the gap between where the work is happening and where the work is being communicated, and rather how the work is being communicated. So before we get into the next topic, let's just assume a not very ideal case where we have an authoring tool and a separate CMS, and we have a separate issue tracker software, and then we have a code base which is lying elsewhere, right? So these are various platforms that need to synchronize to push one release out and to communicate it properly. Let's look at how that would work in an existing agile framework, right? So let's take the example of a SaaS e-commerce solution, something like Shopify. So in an agile environment, this is how each release is planned. So I have an epic, and so epic is probably the highest level of task or activity that you're trying to perform, or the highest level of deliverable, if I can say, right? So in this case, let's take the example of see, I want to enable our customers to create products via the user interface. Something like, I have an e-commerce website and I want to be able to create a product catalog through UI. Probably I was doing it through APIs or other methods in the past, but now I am opening up the UI option. So this is the epic, or this is the deliverable of this release. So now um, let's put aside the scope of other teams for a while and focus on documentation. So at a story level, or which is the biggest chunk of task, would be documentation. That is, when a product manager is planning this, and they are creating an epic to enable this UI option, they have a story which says like, hey, I need documentation. Now coming to the documentation team, once this reaches our table, we have something called as task, where uh, we categorize it at a high level as release documentation and a UI UX content. And then subtasks would be to add release notes, to create user guide articles, and to add UI content, right? And a few more, maybe something that I've left. So, and other than that, in the meantime or in the process, we might have some bug fixes, and I would need to document the bug fixes as well. So by the time I complete the whole process and the documents are ready, we are in completion of an epic, very close to delivering this new feature to the customers. Now, before we move on to the next, I would just like to take a pause here and talk about release versioning, just to set context. So, release versioning is everywhere, right? And why do we need it? So, how often and when do we publish release notes is a very big question. And release versioning can really help you answer that. So, I'm currently on my Mac, so it has a release versioning. I'm using a Chrome browser, so that has a version. And I have a software that I'm using to talk to you all, so that has a version. And maybe I use Git for work, so that has a version. And one common attribute that all these versions have is a kind of number that we see. We have a set of three numbers going on in all release versions. So let's talk about that. So this combination of three numbers as release versions is called the semantic versioning. And why do we need that? It is just an indicator. Say for example, we had, let's talk about the movie Fast and Furious, right? We have like about 10 parts to that movie, 10 sequences to that movie. So how do I know which part was it when, a Rock came in, or which part was it when John Cena was there, right? So we have a version to it just to be able to relate to what instance I'm talking about. Similarly, for any release versioning, we have three components to a release number or the release version number: the major, dot minor, dot patch. Now let us look at how release notes and fixes go about to map to each of these versions. So let's talk about patch. So a patch is the smallest fragment of any release, and it majorly constitutes of bug fixes and trivial updates. I'm not saying it doesn't have anything else, but of course we always have outlier and exceptional use cases. But in a very common scenario, bug fixes and trivial updates contribute to a patch release. And how we number patch releases? Okay, let's say today I'm on 1.0.1, or my software is on 1.0.1 version. If I update a patch, as you see, I have updated 1.0.2. So the last is number has appended and it's become 2. Moving on, next is a minor release version. So minor release is anything that includes, a backward compatibility change, or other UI changes or bug fixes, and some details. Maybe I have fixed some APIs. So these are all backward compatibility function changes. In terms of example, maybe I have additionally introduced, a different way to do. In our case, when maybe I have added, enabled a feature, but if I don't use that feature, it is really not going to change the way I use the software. So this is a kind of backward compatible functionality change that contributes to a minor release. So now I'm moving from 1.0.2, which I picked from patch, and I've appended 1.1.0. You see that I have changed, I have increased the minor version number from 0 to 1, and I have fixed the patch from 2 to 0, because this patch, the patch for the minor one will again start from 0. So if I have a patch in 1.1.0, then the release version would be 1.1.1. Now the major version. Major version is where you have these breaking functionality changes, or removals, or additions of features, or some kind of a functionality, or major deprecations, and I have totally upgraded to a new process. Say I did not have any roles and accesses, but now, say, moving on, my software is actually enforcing a role based access, and I that is the first step. So I really cannot be using the existing version, and once I upgrade, I will not be able to go back to the previous version. So those are the kinds of changes that come into the major version. And as you can see, I have upgraded my version number from 1.1.0 to 2.0.0. Now if you notice, in every point we have upgraded our version number based on the scope of the change. So versioning plays a really important note in helping us as technical writers to see what level of change has gone in and how much information needs to go out. A patch fix doesn't really need a release note, it only needs a fixes update or resolved issues update, and your note is scoped, limiting to only that. Similarly, a major release might include a release note accompanied with a knowledge based article or an entire guide based on the level of change. So release versioning is very important, and we as doc writers have to have this as a single source of truths to plan our timelines. So now let us look at the release types. So now we have planned releases that we just spoke about, that is major, minor, and patch. And we also have unplanned releases that I was talking about. Say I'm in a patch version, but then something broke in the UI, or some code did not work, or some kind of an error which needs to be fixed, and it has to go out in a minor release or a patch release. So we have to make way for such eventualities as well. So once we have a release type defined, now coming to a very specific doc ask is, what type of document is the requester requesting for, right? So we can classify our doc types as release documentation, support escalation, a new feature documentation, say maybe an ad hoc doc request, and doc fixes. It could be a UI content request, or it could be a doc team internal request, right? So let's see what contributes to all of this. Every issue type or the work type will have certain subtasks or tasks associated with it. So for release documentation, the primary task that we're looking at is a release note, and update the product documentation, come up with an API documentation, or it can also include some bug fixes, some major bug fixes. A support escalation issue would have doc tasks as update an information, or remove some information, or some information that is wrongly mentioned, or we forgot to update. All that comes under support escalation when we get this through a support or a customer. And new feature documentation would include tasks like adding a new topic, or adding a new reference page, um, adding a new API page, all of that. And an ad hoc request would be reorganize pages, and to add images or screenshots or something. Maybe somebody wants to add a GIF to make it more explanatory. So these are all ad hoc requests that we get. Other than that, we as doc teams have our own set of tasks. Other than working with other stakeholders internally, we might working on constantly improvising the doc. So we have fixing issues like typos or broken images or links, or reorganizing. And some of the organizations also actively include the doc team with the UI and UX part of the product. So one other type of doc request that we work on could be a UI UX label or help text documentation or content for walkthroughs. And as a part of the documentation team, we have our goals where we plan to restructure the documentation, or we want to change how the documentation flow is, or maybe we want to give a user centric content, or we want to fix the search. All of these come under the doc team's internal initiative, and we can divide them into these tasks. Now that we know the release types and the doc work, let us talk about how this falls in our bucket, or I am working, and how do I get a task assigned to me. So the first step is triaging. So whenever there's a request in any of these formats, we see the necessity for a doc and how that needs to be done. And then based on who the writer is, so my team, I could probably have 6 or 7 writers. I want to identify to whom this task is being created, and then I pick it up. Say I put it in my to-do list, and then as a first step, I start drafting. And then it goes for a tech review first, and uh, tech review can actually have some feedback. So I want to fix the review comments and then send it back to review, right? And then it goes for a peer review, and after peer review, I upload it to the CMS, or I publish it, or I create a draft in the authoring tool, and then I publish it. And then it goes for the post ops, where you talk about the analysis part of it as to the page performance and all. So this plan also works effectively for a release. So now let us look at the 3 components that we saw. We want to put them into perspective for a release. So we started here. So we wanted to plan, and we wanted to have a release cycle, and we wanted the doc team to be a part of the planning phase. Once we do that, um, at a high level, we have an epic that is being created. And in the epic, we have certain contributions to make that are our deliverables or doc deliverables. We're talking about a new feature. So I have a release note, and I have some documents also to go with it. Once that is defined, I will look at the release version. This helps me plan my timeline and a delivery date and other SLAs as to how much time I have to work on this release note or that particular doc update. Once that is done, um, I find the doc type, which is say release documentation in this case, and then I use the triaging method. I use this method or the workflow to pass my work through different stages. That is, from when I know that this is coming to when the development is underway. I start drafting the documentation, and I complete the review process, and it is ready. And then I merge my work, or I'm ready to publish my documentation by the time the deployment is happening. So while the code is moving to the production phase or the sandbox phase based on what your or process is, I also have my documentation ready. So I can call this whole process as the release documentation lifecycle, right? So what happens when I have such a thorough, foolproof process is um, I'll be able to filter using the doc types. So say my team has about 5 or 6 writers. I know that each person has some work. So let's take, for example, Emmet here in the first person in my team. She has one release work, and I can also see that her release work is still open. As you can see from here, her release work is still open. And say, for example, I'm talking about Ryan Lee. Ryan Lee has 2 new doc items that he needs to work in, one fix. Now, if I go here, I see that Ryan Lee has 1 open item and 2 closed items. So he has closed the new docs, and he is still working on the fixes. Similarly, for um, each of our assignees or the team members, we can get a very clear picture of what is happening. And with this, I'll also be able to uh, give an ETA as to when my doc will be release ready. Say, for example, the release notes in this case, say Jennifer Evans, the second person, has 1 release item, and her release item, it says it's in progress, and it is in progress. So now I have a version to it, right? Here I see I have a version. So I know I can fix my SLAs that, hey, we only have 2 more days to fix this release note and ready to be published. So having a process like this with defined issue types or doc types really helps us streamline and time our delivery to match the production. Now, consolidating all the information that we had there with the workflow, I can have a team analytics dashboard. Of course, these dashboards are tool agnostic, and I can customize them to the needs of our team. But what exactly these dashboards help us do is they help us, track progress towards the next milestone. That is the first tile you see on the left. Here, what I mean by this is, suppose I'm looking at a release, say, for this quarter in 2024, and the release is happening sometime second week of October. I have the timelines here. I know who is working on what and how much work is pending, right? Based on what we had here. Based on all these, I know what is happening and what is pending. And then the item on the right, which says subsections of the project. So I know if it is a release doc, or if it is a bug fix, or if it is a new documentation request, or it's a doc team initiative, what category of work is under progress and how much of work is done, right? And the graph that you see, it actually shows the work completed by each member and how much work we have completed as a doc team in the whole. So it really quantifies our deliverables. And and then you see a relative workload per person, which is similar to what we saw here. Like here, I know, say, I think that Max Taylor has only got 2 fixes, and we know fixes by nature are not major doc updates in a usual case. So I have some bandwidth here with Max, so I can try and assign more work to them. So that's the kind of information that you can derive from these dashboards. And high risk items are based on priorities. So certain tools help you assign priorities to these tasks. So again, let's take the example of a patch fix. But in the patch, I have a very major and a very critical update that has to go, and it is unplanned, right? It just came, something broke for a customer, or some data is not working the way it should for some reason, and then the code was fixed, and I need to push it out immediately. So I want to have a doc for it. So at the story level, when the engineer is creating this story, they will assign a priority to that, and based on that priority, that thing reflects on my dashboard. So as leaders, we can identify all of this using one consolidated dashboard. Again, the only purpose is to plan more smoothly. And uh, since I'm talking about, as you all apparently know, this is Jira, so there are different ways to customize this dashboard to optimize. The idea is to just get a bird's eye view of how you want to prioritize your task, and very in lines with the release, how well release work is going on from the doc team's perspective, right? So now, to plan a release documentation, look at it as these 5 steps as a bottom up approach. The first one is that we saw in the very first phase, like, getting onboarded at the planning phase at the epic level, if I have to talk in an agile term. So that is where you start looking at any release work in terms of documentation, right? And some tasks that you ideally do is either the leadership, or even if you're individual contributors, talk to the stakeholders, primarily the product managers or product owners, about the release scope as to what the release is about, and then start planning it, at an epic level. As soon as an epic is created for that particular release, start planning the documentation deliverables, and how you want to do it, and who is going to work on what item, and then create workflows to automate your doc requests. And the next step is to incorporate versioning or leverage versioning to plan and prioritize your work, right? So based on the release version or fixed version, you have a clear timeline defined as to when your work is going out. And this helps you define SLAs also as doc teams, because in ideal case, what happens is release note often comes at the very end as a request, and it's all a hush hush, and we don't really have time to think, but we just spin up something and we deliver. So versioning really helps you plan your timelines. And then use issue types and filters. I will walk you through some other ways also to do it, but please use issue types to identify. That also helps you prioritize, right? Like I have a release item and I have say an internal doc improvement project. I will definitely prioritize the release work and then come to the doc improvement initiative. So having issue types and filters really helps you focus on what the deliverable is. And then for leaders, please have these dashboards and review them time to time. It gives you a lot of insights. Once you do this bottom up approach from having issue types to having SLAs and versioning your items properly, you will really get a very good view of where your team stands at any given time, and it really helps you to plan capacity and to optimize the kind of work that the team is doing. Sorry. And the most important thing is enforce all your doc processes to stakeholders, right? You have these SLAs. I think you must have timelines to freeze a doc. Like I have a major release, and after a certain point I will not really touch the code. That is a code freeze. Why not a doc freeze? So please try and implement such processes where you also have SLAs and strict timelines for docs. Say someone is coming for a very late doc request, make sure it gets escalated and then you address it, so that the next time you also have some doc freezes, and you really don't overflow with work or not pressed with a lot of new work at a very last moment. And keep iterating the process until you find the right fit. So all this while, all the processes that I was talking about, maybe Jira was one best tool and a very popular tool, so to say. But you can also manage this process with a very simple and humble Excel sheet that we have, right? So this is an Excel sheet that would probably help you track your work. So column 1 says Jira ticket, column A says Jira ticket. This could be a Jira ticket or any other tool that the doc team or the coding team or the development team or PMs are using to track their efforts. Um, when we are talking about documentation or release documentation specifically, there definitely has to be a parent task to do with the engineers and PMs, aligned with which is only when a doc comes. So you always have this kind of a parent work item. I've called it Jira ticket here, but you can, it could be any other task management app or even other sheet that you're using to specify the work item. And then you have a description, and then you have a summary, and then you have two fields, which is KC required and release note required. So this KC is to do with the release. And then there are some specific stakeholder comments, and then you have release version to it, and then the actual release timeline, and then the expectation from the stakeholder, and then you track the progress as to if it is done or no. So this is a simple way to track, even in case you are not able to go for really high end tools. And other than that, some popular tools would be Jira, Trello, or Excel. You can also use simple Kanban boards to track your doc team's efforts. So
Smita, just a quick heads up. You have 5 minutes, no, before we transition into the question and answer segment. So yeah,
okay.
let's
Yeah.
just speed up. Yeah.
So I think I will close with that. um, Thank you, everyone.
Ah, that's great. You're on time then. Okay. So now we will transition into the question and answer segment. I'll read the questions aloud for you, Smita, and then you can take them over.
Sure.
Okay. So the first question is from Anmol. He says that in the chart that you showed under epic story etc, how do you measure volume work for a writer within a release in a planning stage?
So to answer that question, I think we spoke about the issue types or the type of work there, right? So say again, like let's take the example of the new user interface feature that's coming up. Uh, the high level description is document, and then I say this is the release type, but then I can again divide it into subtasks. So each of the documentation effort, whether it is a release note, whether it is a knowledge article update, or if it is a bug fix that you're introducing, or even as I mentioned, UI label work or a product walkthrough that you're going to write for, everything is defined as a task. And because you know that Epic has a release version and it has a date to it, you know the timeline, and then based on your internal capacity planning, you decide when and how many days. Say, that SLA is very important that I was talking about. If your individual contributors or doc leaders come up with SLAs, say, for a release note I'm going to take 2 days, and second day the release note is off my bucket for review, right? If I have to update a knowledge centered article, if it is just one article, define an SLA that I'm going to take 3 to 5 days. If it is going to be an entire guide, say it's going to take anywhere between 7 to 10 days. So those SLAs, you map them with the release timeline, and then you start working. Each work item has to be a task, because you have to complete one to jump on to the next one. So all these items put together is when is how you plan the times and how you decide how much time you're going to take to work on one item. um, does that answer the question?
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Anmol. Thanks, Mita. And the next question is from Balu Kosuri. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. So he says that in a flow from problem statement to development to testing and then to deployed, if the epics are picked up at testing stage to be documented, what is the ratio of tickets that may end up going back into development phase from testing phase because of a change and ends up missing that release window and then gets pushed up to the next release? Yeah, in such a scenario, how to better plan on picking up the epic so that the efforts of the writers don't get wasted?
um, right, I get that.
Yeah.
So so when I said that at the epic level you also start a documentation user story, and then uh, and after that, before you start writing, you have a to do list. Once this ticket is triaged, you have a to do list, and then you have an offline communication. Use any of the channels, say for example Slack, or you meet up, or you join the Scrum meetings. You know what the status of the project is, right? You move your ticket, or you move your work item from a to do to in progress only when you have a flag off saying that, hey, um, this is good to go, or when the PM holds you until the development is finished. So it's an internal communication, but again, from the moment it's triage, you don't start documenting. You start documenting only when you have a flag off from the PM or the engineer saying that, hey, this is done. Until the time, you can plan, you can do your research around, and you can have your drafts ready, because anyway it's not going to go waste, because they're coming up with the next iteration and it's only pushed to the release cycle. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, there are also features that really come to the deployment phase and then get scrapped. So I think these are some eventualities that we have to work with. But in most cases, right as a ticket is triaged, you really don't start drafting the doc right off the bat. You wait, and then you have some communication with the involved teams, and you start only after a certain stage of development. I think your product manager will be the best person to coordinate with that. And in case the developed item is not going out in this release and it's being pushed to the next release, and until it's not a major change, I think you might have tweaks to your documentation, but then you don't lose your work, because anyway you're going to push it, maybe not in this cycle but the next one. So you don't start your work right as soon as a work comes to your to-do list. You check with the stakeholders as to the completeness of the project or which stage the development is in, and then you start working on the documentation.
Yeah, I hope, Balu, that answers your question.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we'll move. Yeah, we'll move to Diana. She's asking that KC required. Does that mean from the last sheet?
Yeah, so that's an internal term. So KC required is knowledge center article required. So what I was trying to show in that sheet was, for a release, when you sit and plan with your PM or someone, you decide whether it's a release note only or you need a knowledge center article also. Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all with the question and answers. If so, you have any more questions, you can post them in the Agile group and then we can take them forward from there. But coming to the session, it was really an insightful session and the presentation even. So really glad, Smita, that you conducted it really well. And then your emphasis is on enforcing the processes, whether it was defining, the freeze timelines, utilizing the project dashboards. It really benefited us, I feel it, and it will benefit us. So the strategies that were for customizing the issue types and then collaborating with the product owners, uh, I feel they are especially valuable. And yeah, so we appreciate your expertise and then the guidance in enhancing our documentation practices. So thank you so much for all the efforts that you just put in. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Anshita. Thank you.
Yeah, over to you, Sunita.
Thank you, Anshika.